We might have spent a lot of time on this channel doing different challenges along the way and trying to up the ante in how we approach Halo campaigns. But there was one challenge that Bungie themselves put on their player base back in the day that definitely stood out as an extreme challenge to those who were willing to put in the effort, and definitely not one that you could just take on lightly, and that definitely has to be the Halo Vidmaster Challenge. This was a huge deal. The Recon Helmet in Halo 3 was the rarest and most sought after helmet during the run of Halo 3's life. It was this unobtainable helmet with no path to actually get it until Halo 3 ODST came out and Bungie announced an update with some new achievements that meant that if you could collect all 7 legendary achievements, you could grace yourself with the Halo 3 Recon Helmet. So we decided, what if we go back now and get that Recon Helmet and do whatever we would need to do to get the Recon Helmet nowadays? Sure, we know since Bungie doesn't have Halo anymore, they don't give out the Recon Helmet for getting these achievements, and 343 actually just gave everyone the Recon Helmet in Halo 3 anyways. So while we are not going to actually get the Recon Helmet as a reward for doing this, we thought we would at least go through all of the steps that were required back in the day if we were to get that Recon Helmet the most legitimate way possible. This challenge is often overlooked and forgotten, but we were determined to bring it back just once more. So back in the day, there were 7 achievements that you needed to get in order to get the Recon Helmet. First up was Vidmaster Lightswitch, which is one we're not going to be able to really get in this video since we're really doing most of this on the Master Chief Collection. But essentially, you had to hit the rank of Lieutenant in some sort of ranked playlist in Halo 3. Now, hitting the rank of Lieutenant maybe could take a little while since it was actual ranked matchmaking and it wasn't like just a level progression system, but I remember getting this one pretty easily, and I never was the type of player to play a lot of competitive Halo. I think my team just carried me eventually. So this one definitely isn't as much as a part of the challenge as much as you just needed it as proof that you played matchmaking enough and you had all the DLC to play the ranked playlist. Then there was 7-on-7, which also not so much was a challenge here. You just had to play in the playlist called 7-on-7, which would come on the 7th of the month and have 7 XP in that playlist. If for whatever reason you had more than 7 XP, you could actually lose the game on purpose and de-rank yourself to get back down to 7, but either way, you could get the achievement for that one pretty easily too. So then there was just 5 challenges left for this Vidmaster challenge, and these are the real challenges back in 2009 and 2010. First, there was Vidmaster Brainpain, which involved a player having to locate all of the mythic skulls which were hidden across various Halo multiplayer levels. Then there was Vidmaster Classic, which you could only get in Halo 3 ODST, which involves you completing any campaign level without shooting a single shot while on legendary difficulty. Then there was the popular Vidmaster Annual, which essentially was a part of an update added into Halo 3 midway through its life, but if you played through the final level on legendary difficulty, there's 4 ghosts that spawn in the bottom corner of the stairs after defeating 343 Guilty Spark, and with the Iron Skull on, you're supposed to drive through the entire level and complete it, which is extremely difficult because not only in the first part you have the Iron Skull on and you have to make your way up the tower and defend the tower without one player dying and resetting everyone back to the last checkpoint, but then you have to do this ghost driving sequence, and if one person messes up and falls off, everyone goes back to the last checkpoint. Then there was Vidmaster Deja Vu. Much like Vidmaster Annual, you have to complete Coastal Highway in Halo 3 ODST Legendary with the Iron Skull on, and this time you can't go in a Warthog or a tank, which means you have to complete the level only using a Mongoose or a Ghost, but the game does give you rocket launchers with unlimited ammo, so they give you that, but there's a lot of enemies on the Coastal Highway with legendary difficulty on. And finally, if you could get through all of those, you're faced with one of the hardest, possibly the hardest challenge in the pool of challenges here, Vidmaster Endure, which essentially required you to survive through 4 sets of firefight mode on heroic difficulty. If you're a casual firefight player, you might think that's not that hard, just maybe a little time consuming, but remember, this is back in the ODST days before you had custom ability in the firefight game type, meaning you had to survive off of just the 7 lives that they gave you, and you had to share those lives amongst your teammates. So we got the typical group together for this run. We had to all make sure we had Halo 3 and ODST installed, along with the Xbox 360 version of ODST, because Firefight hasn't been added to the MCC yet until later on this summer, which we're excited about. But fortunately enough, Tails had ODST on the 360, so we were good to go in that regard. So for first up was Vidmaster Brainpain, which actually gives you towards a few different achievements if you go for this one in the Master Chief Collection. But essentially, we all loaded up into Forge and we just flew around the maps looking for all of the hidden skulls. And since we had kind of known their locations already ahead of time, it really wasn't all that difficult. The ones hidden on Heretic and Assembly are pretty easy to find. Orbital is kind of tucked way up in the elevator shaft area, so it's easier if just one player grabs it. The one on Longshore is just kind of out in the corner, so it's not too hard to grab either. And then there's two more, which are a little bit more challenging than the rest. The one on Sandbox is actually way outside of the map in the dark desert area where the Guardians will just blast you if you go out there. So the main strategy back in the day that still works to this day is just simply overload the map with a bunch of trip mines, just set the runtime down to a minimum of 1, and you just spam them until the grid goes away. In the instance where we did this, the skull actually despawned in the process, so since we were in Forge, we just put a teleporter near where the skull will spawn. We went back to the main area and linked the teleporter there, started a new round, and then quickly went through the teleporter and grabbed the skull, which made this one pretty easy. Then when you get to Citadel, this level, every single time I try to help someone get the skull on this level, we always run into trouble. This level is so symmetrical, it can get so easy to get lost and confused in where the skull is tucked away. It's tucked away up in these little upper areas, but since there's so many sections that are symmetrical, it's really easy to get turned around and confused as to where the skull is. So we spent the better half of maybe a half an hour looking around for the skull before we finally found it. But sure enough, it is there. Just a really frustrating level nonetheless. So without too much of a headache, we had completed Vidmaster Brainpain, which was looking pretty good. So we decided to go on to Vidmaster Classic, which is another one that is not necessarily the hardest if you know what you're doing. Now for this one, you have to actually do it solo. You can't do it in co-op. So we all had to split up for our runs. But the main strategy for this run was to load up on the level Uplift Reserve and essentially grab a ghost or a chopper as soon as you can and just kind of boost your way through everything and avoid as much damage as possible. Fortunately enough, if you know where you're going, you're probably going to be okay doing it this way. There are health packs kind of scattered throughout the level. You're probably going to be able to clear the level as long as you know where you're going. So this one actually wasn't nearly as bad as we thought it would be. So that was another Vidmaster knocked off this challenge list. But then we were faced with the three big boys, the Vidmaster Annual, Deja Vu, and of course Endure. Vidmaster Annual right away turned out to be pretty frustrating because with all of the flood that's in the area, it's really difficult to coordinate what the plan is and what we should be doing to progress in this level. Not only on legendary difficulty is the flood bulky and challenging, but with 4 of us running around, there's a high chance one of us might randomly die and mess the run up for everyone. The main strategy though that we went to was doing a grenade jump over in this corner, or just jumping off of people's heads to get everyone up there as quickly as possible, and try to do this trick to quickly scale up the side of the building as fast as possible, avoiding all of the combat you have typically when you make your way up the tower. Now there are other ways to jump up the tower by doing things like gravity hammer jumps, but honestly we prefer doing it this way rather than doing gravity hammer jumps from the bottom section, as there's more likely a chance of us falling into the pit, and to try to launch 4 people up there, especially some types of players who've never done advanced jumps like that before, probably wasn't really the best bet for us when we could kind of go this side way that maybe took a little bit longer, but did have a little bit of a safer route associated with it. We then made our way up to where we got to the top of the tower and then jumped down to the cliff section where Sergeant Johnson is. Then we entered the next challenging part of the level, which is doing this glitch that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. We've learned a little bit along the way from previous videos what exactly causes this glitch to work and what not. But essentially, if you kill Sergeant Johnson twice, his second Spartan laser will actually have unlimited ammo in it, which you can then go ahead and use as often as needed to take out the flood down below. Now, the main thing you have to watch out for, of course, is if you kill Sergeant Johnson too many times, he might try to betray you, and that is just an extra challenge that we didn't really need. But sure enough, this is probably the most surefire way of clearing Vidmaster Annual's early section of the level, as having the unlimited Spartan laser definitely helps at clearing those enemies, especially if you're up in this area where no enemies really come. We did die a couple of times though, because the flood can still shoot at you, and sometimes we were just kind of not being that smart with some of our decisions, were we? And we would die and have to kind of go back to last checkpoint. Wasn't the most fun, but we did get through this section, making our way way into the fight with Guilty Spark, which actually wasn't that hard. Guilty Spark is kind of a cakewalk if you've played Halo 3 literally any amount of times. The next section was probably the most involved section, as we were up close and personal with the Flood once again, but getting down to the ghosts definitely helps, as you can use the guns on the ghost to clear some of the enemies, and you have to kind of make your way up on this ice mountain path with the ghost, which can be kind of challenging, especially if one player drives off. It's pretty annoying when you have to reset because of that, but if you can make your way into the hallway section, having just one player who kind of knows what they're doing shoot at the various enemies with their ghost, you can clear the indoor section and move along somewhat safely to get through this tunnel area. When it comes down to actually doing the whole entire run, we did have some success early on. The main strategy is making sure whoever's in the front doesn't go too fast or drives too far ahead, because essentially the map will, in certain sections, fall apart based on which player is the furthest ahead, and the level is kind of catered to whoever that first lead player is. So as long as, for the most part, the whole team is sticking somewhat together, we were able to have some success when Tails wasn't causing us to die constantly. The only sections that were really rough definitely were these areas when you have to kind of snake through these platforms right after a checkpoint, because essentially if you're towards the back or the middle when these platforms start to fall, they're on a timer based here. They're not actually sequential like other sections of the level, so you easily get stuck on these and get turned around and you're gonna die, wiping for everyone else. So we definitely had to deal with that. And then of course the biggest challenge with this is the final stretch, because you do have to go a really long time without messing up to complete the level, and there's no checkpoints in that final stretch, so you really have to know where you're going, or at least whoever's leading the way has to not only know which way they're going, but also has to be courteous to what's going to happen in their pathway that they're leading through that everyone will be following them on. If, for instance, Dim was in the lead and just kind of drove over a platform that would fall out from under him right after he passed over it, he kind of would doom his teammates. So we definitely had to be considerate, at least, about that through this section. But with enough perseverance, we did actually do the ghost run, and while Vidmaster Annual definitely was a step up from the other challenges so far, we knew that Deja Vu and Endure only get harder in scale, so Deja Vu was up next and we were definitely sweating it. The early part of this level leading up to the mongoose section actually wasn't that hard to accomplish. The real challenge definitely comes when you get into the mongoose and you have one person driving and one person better be good at rocket launchers, because this was really frustrating the whole way through. Honestly, with the amount of enemies, you have to be really good at shooting your rocket launcher if you're on shooting duty, because if you miss just one shot, you might actually be putting yourself in the position to die by a different enemy just shortly after if you get stuck in a reloading animation. And the further you make it on the highway, the harder the enemies start to get, and it starts to become this correspondence between the two groups who are in separate mongooses, as you definitely have to be careful to, first of all, take out the enemies along the way, and second of all, not kill your teammates by accident if they are near you. Also, the other thing that definitely comes up multiple times is if you take out an enemy that is in front of you and they speed up towards you, like if they're in a ghost or something, you have a high chance of blowing your teammate up who is in the driver's seat, and that of course wipes it for everyone as well. Then the next challenging part involving this was definitely the fact that along the way, as you get into the tunnel sections that open up the next area of the highway, you have to make sure all of the mongooses travel through that area at the same time and not too late, or else you won't get a checkpoint, which means if you die anywhere on the next pathway, you're likely to be sent all the way back, and you have to do quite a bit of work again before getting to try to get the checkpoint once again. This happened to us multiple times towards the end of the level, and it was so frustrating whenever this happened. We were actually getting tilted at each other every time we messed up, because there was just sometimes one group would be focused on one part of the task to get forward, while the other group was maybe looking ahead at the next task, and it could get kind of challenging to correspond and work together to get through some parts, because there's so much constantly happening that you have to quickly adjust and adapt along the way. Sometimes we would do this strategy where one of us would drive way ahead and the other group would stay back shooting at enemies in the early section, and then all of a sudden we were separated by a bunch of enemies and one side would die. And no matter what, if you're playing this level and you played for a long time and the other group dies while you're just safe and sound because they didn't follow you, it feels really frustrating, even even though their death is possibly justified or possibly the result of you driving off in the first place. So there definitely was a lot of chaos and frustration during this run, but we kept pushing on forward, going through each section and really just trying to pace things out here. Health is also really scarce since it's not like you can just respawn with more health. So we always had to make decisions when to stop and try to pick up health and when to back off or when to switch the mongoose out and whatnot. But still, we somehow made it through the entire highway section and just had the firefight section at the end of the level ahead of us. Now, fortunately enough, the firefight at the end isn't actually all that difficult if you kind of stay close to Virgil, take on those shields, and use the rocket launchers with unlimited ammo, unless in this case you're Luke, who somehow at the beginning of the run accidentally picked up a rocket launcher that I had that wasn't the one with the unlimited ammo when I traded it for the one with unlimited ammo. So Luke had no rocket launcher ammo by the end of all of this. It was pretty unlucky because it just so happened that the one time we had succeeded at getting further ahead was the time he accidentally grabbed the wrong rocket launcher and didn't realize it. Still, we were able to persevere through this and we completed Vidmaster Deja Vu, leaving us with just one last achievement to go, Vidmaster Endure. Now, back as a kid or a 14-year-old Halo player, I too had managed to get every Vidmaster achievement on the list of Vidmasters except Vidmaster Endure. I tried it so many times, and every time I tried it, I got close, but never quite could make it through that last set or the last round, as the enemies just really start to stack up. And as you progress further in Firefight on Halo 3 ODST, more skulls get added, making it more and more challenging as you go. This pretty much was the defining section of this challenge, where we would really be tested if we could get through and if we could earn that recon that we weren't going to get. So we booted up the old school Halo 3 ODST once again, and we decided to try a strategy that was very popular back in the day, where you are inside the Oni building and essentially split up into two teams. We had Dim and Tails on one side and Luke and I on the other. Essentially, this strategy has it where you are facing off in the directions where the enemies will come from, and you can work together on the stairs to pick off the enemies without letting them get too close. And by kind of having all the enemies pass through this middle section, you often can help out the other group by shooting at the enemies as well. This is definitely one of the most formatted approaches to trying to get Vidmaster Endure, and it makes sense why a lot of people went for this approach, because for the most part, you definitely are able to take cover and help your teammates out, and you can kind of make the call outs for when the enemies are coming and what is coming ahead of time. Now, you are limited when you do ODST Firefight to ammo that only respawns occasionally as you progress, and health packs that also only occasionally respawn once you get past a round. But with 5 waves in a round and 3 rounds in a set, and having to get through 4 sets on heroic difficulty, this was going to be so much harder than we had maybe anticipated going into it for the first time. It definitely becomes apparent that you have to be really in communication with your team, because when you only have 7 lives to share, it definitely turns into one of those situations where you really don't want to be the one to die and take a point or take a life away from your team. We actually did decently here in this setup, and things were working out pretty well. We did run into problems though whenever we actually completed a set and we got to the bonus round, where essentially a bunch of grunts start jumping from the ceilings and you have to try to get as many points as possible. And if you can get enough points, you can actually get a bonus life or a couple of bonus lives to kind of get you caught up a little bit and kind of dampen how far you might have fallen in the set before. But with this specific setup, it was really difficult to actually get any of those bonus lives. And the further we got in this playthrough, it seemed like the harder the enemies were getting, as each new set adds more and more skulls as well. As more skulls start to get activated, you run into things like Famine, where enemy weapons don't have a lot of ammo, or the Black Eye Skull, where the only way you can regenerate health is by punching an enemy, which involves you getting up close to enemies. These little things don't sound like a big deal at first, but they actually end up being a huge catalyst into your team just wiping and running out of lives. And that's actually what happened to us, and while we got really close, we couldn't quite beat the firefight to the 4th set. And it was pretty disheartening because we did get some good progress and we had a good setup going, but it just wasn't quite enough for us to carry through. So we decided to try it again. This time we changed maps up, going for the area that takes place in the zoo by Uplift Reserve. And sure, the last strategy wasn't the worst location. It was really good for organized gameplay, but just knowing how we typically play Halo, where we kind of get bored and we start start maybe taking some risks in our gunplay when we probably should be playing it safe, maybe trying a more chaotic strategy could work better for us. Essentially, the main strategy we were going for on this level instead was we would have 2 players drive around in a Warthog while the other 2 players sat up on the building taking out enemies, and one person who is up on the building would use the Spartan laser to take out the wraiths. We decided to designate that job to Tails because it seemed like the easiest thing to not mess up on. Meanwhile, Luke and Dim would drive around in the Warthog shooting at enemies until they could find a couple of choppers and take those instead, as having 2 players in separate choppers allows for the ability to splatter and shoot simultaneously in 2 separate vehicles, which was actually a pretty decent strategy. And oddly enough, while we still had a lot of challenge as we progressed through this, as the enemies only got more and more challenging, we definitely felt like A, we're having more fun doing the run this way, and B, we were maybe doing a little bit better. Sure, we were still just having random things happen where we would die, and it would be really frustrating along the way, or Tails would randomly beat me down when he was trying to punch a bugger. I don't know how that happened. Unfortunately, while we were making good progress, it wasn't enough to actually stay alive. We didn't seem to have enough firepower on the ground level to possibly cover for the other guys who are in the choppers whenever something maybe went slightly wrong, like an enemy knocks over a chopper, or Luke or Dim would flip or something like that, or their vehicle would get destroyed. It just seemed like whenever something like that happened, it became this cataclysmic failure where we just started losing lives really quickly. So we did end up wiping on our run on this level, and it was looking more and more so like maybe we weren't going to be able to pull this one off. But we decided, why not? Let's try one more time on this level, and we went again, but this time we tried something slightly different. While Tails more or less was doing a decent job taking out the wraiths with his Spartan laser as soon as they dropped, which really posed the main threat to insta-kill any of the choppers, we decided to continuously utilize the Warthog as a vehicle until we could get 3 players in a chopper instead. That way we could constantly have a stockpile of 2 choppers going no matter what, even if a player dies, and the other player can back up until we can get another chopper ready for them. And it definitely was better for clearing enemies faster and stopping them from getting up the stairs to where Tails was, so we didn't have to worry necessarily about him dying as often to enemies that would push up on him. And with 3 players in choppers instead of just 2, we definitely were doing a much better job at clearing out the enemies as we went along. Now, of course, there were times where random things happened and choppers got blown up, or we would die along the way, but what was really reassuring was while we did this strategy, it worked in a way where if we knew that there was a player who needed a chopper, the other players in the choppers could try to target an enemy chopper and only shoot it enough to kill the driver, letting another player jump in to continue our circle around the zoo. We even utilized the Warthog at times where we just didn't have choppers and just went back to that early strategy even later in the game when the enemies had much more armor because of the skulls that were activated. And this was really, really big. And then when bonus rounds came up, we made sure that we were focused more on staying alive and then on picking off the enemies rather than just throwing ourselves in the bonus lives round to see if we can get some quick points early on. And doing that strategy did help us rack up more points, which gave us a little bit more of a cushion for surviving with the lives that we had. And we actually came up with this good system where we were able to predict to an extent where the enemies were coming from and what was going on. Not to say we didn't have any close calls along the way that were extremely nerve-wracking, but it definitely was something we made some serious progress in as we progressed on. And finally enough, with us doing this strategy and really coordinating and working together, we were able to actually surpass the 4th set and get this achievement that had stayed dormant on my Xbox 360 profile since I tried to get that achievement way back in the day in 2009. So not only was I relieved to finally get that original Vidmaster Endure achievement, not the MCC version of it, just the OG one, it was a really bittersweet moment knowing that yes, I'd completed all the Vidmaster challenges, we all completed all the Vidmaster challenges, and of course there's no reward for doing it because 343 just gave everyone the Recon Helmet anyways, but knowing in our own mind that we completed all of the Vidmaster challenges definitely was this awesome moment to have. We really hope that in the future of Halo, like with Halo Infinite, these types of achievements and challenges come back that kind of push players to maybe do a type of gameplay that they wouldn't naturally try on their own. Yeah, there's achievements for doing things like lasso or doing a gameplay on legendary, but what about something different that makes you think differently, like using a specific vehicle only or trying to survive with your team for a certain amount of time? That type of stuff is really cool, and we really hope to see more of it in the future. But hey, after all of that, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos just like this one, and you won't miss anything we upload, even if YouTube's acting all whack. Also, if you want to, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Rocket Elijah, or you can follow Luke at Rocket Sloth Luke. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.